In the heart of downtown Chicago, where glass skyscrapers cast long shadows over busy streets, destiny wove together two lives that couldn't have seemed more different. It was a bitter January morning, the kind that makes your bones ache and your breath visible in the air. Michael, a 45-year-old financial advisor, was walking his usual route to work when he noticed something unusual outside the old bookstore he passed every day. Huddled in a thin blanket, a teenage boy sat shivering against the building's brick wall. What caught Michael's attention wasn't just the boy's desperate situation, but the worn textbook clutched tightly in his frozen hands. Even in the harsh morning light, the determination in the young man's eyes was unmistakable as he studied each page, his fingers trembling from the cold. Most people hurried past, their eyes glued to their phones or fixed straight ahead, practicing that peculiar city skill of not seeing what they don't want to see. But Michael couldn't look away. Maybe it was because the boy reminded him of his own son back home. Or perhaps it was the familiar calculus textbook that spoke of dreams bigger than current circumstances. "Hey there," Michael said, his voice cutting through the morning chill. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" The teenager looked up, surprise and wariness playing across his face. His name was Chris, and he was 17. What unfolded over the next cup of hot chocolate at the nearby diner would change both their lives forever. As steam rose from their cups, Chris's story emerged piece by piece. He'd been a straight-A student, with dreams of becoming an engineer, until 6 months ago when his world turned upside down. Family tragedy, financial hardship, and a series of unfortunate events had left him homeless. Yet there he was, still clutching his textbook, refusing to let go of his dreams. Michael listened, really listened, as Chris spoke about his passion for mathematics and his struggle to keep up with his studies while navigating life on the streets. The boy's resilience struck a chord deep within Michael's heart. Here was someone who, despite every obstacle life had thrown his way, was still fighting for his future. What started as a simple act of kindness, that morning set in motion a chain of events that would challenge both men's preconceptions about life, success, and what it means to be family. Michael's decision to stop that day wasn't just about helping someone in need. It was about recognizing the human spirit that connects us all, regardless of our circumstances or backgrounds. But the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust doesn't come naturally when life has taught you to expect the worst, and good intentions alone don't solve years of systemic challenges. As Michael and Chris began their unlikely journey together, they would face skepticism from friends and family, bureaucratic hurdles, and their own doubts and fears. What happened next would test their newfound bond in ways neither could have imagined. As Chris struggled to balance his dreams with the harsh realities of his situation, Michael would question everything he thought he knew about privilege, opportunity, and responsibility. Their story would become more than just about helping someone in need. It would challenge an entire community to examine their own biases and beliefs. The question wasn't just whether Michael could help Chris find his way back to stability and education. It was whether two people from completely different worlds could bridge the gap between them and create something truly meaningful. As the winter wind howled outside that diner window, neither man could have predicted how their chance encounter would ripple out to touch countless other lives. That first meeting at the diner stretched into hours as the morning rush ebbed and flowed around them. Michael learned that Chris had been living on the streets for exactly 6 months and 13 days, though he spoke about it with a matter-of-factness that made Michael's heart ache. Before everything fell apart, Chris had been in his junior year of high school, taking advanced placement classes and dreaming of MIT or Stanford. The story of how he ended up homeless unfolded slowly, like a delicate origami being carefully unfolded. His mother had battled cancer for years, working multiple jobs until she physically couldn't anymore. The medical bills had devoured their savings, and then their home. When she passed away, Chris found himself alone in a world that seemed indifferent to his pain. His father had never been in the picture, and distant relatives were either unwilling or unable to help. Yet somehow, through it all, Chris had managed to hold onto his backpack filled with textbooks. He would spend hours in the public library, not just for warmth, but to keep up with his studies through online resources. The librarians turned a blind eye to him sleeping in the quiet corners during slow afternoons, recognizing a soul who hungered for knowledge as much as for food. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting was more than coincidence. His own life, which had seemed so perfectly ordered just hours ago, suddenly felt hollow in comparison to the raw determination he saw in Chris's eyes. Here was a kid who had every reason to give up, yet refused to let his circumstances define his future. The following days became a careful dance of building trust. Michael would bring coffee and breakfast to their spot outside the bookstore, and they would talk about mathematics, engineering, and life. Chris's knowledge of advanced calculus was impressive, but it was his understanding of mechanical principles that truly showed his potential. He could explain complex engineering concepts using nothing but napkins and a borrowed pen, his eyes lighting up with passion as he described his ideas. But the streets had taught Chris to be cautious. When Michael first offered more substantial help, a place to stay, assistance with getting back into school, Chris hesitated. Too many people had made promises before, only to disappear when things got complicated. The weight of broken trust hung heavy between them, an invisible barrier that would take time and patience to break down. Meanwhile, Michael's wife Sarah had questions about his sudden interest in helping a homeless teenager. Their own son was away at college, and she worried about the risks and responsibilities of getting involved in someone else's life so deeply. The conversations at home became tense, filled with unspoken fears and societal prejudices that neither of them wanted to acknowledge. As winter deepened, Michael couldn't stop thinking about Chris sleeping in the bitter cold. He began reaching out to local organizations, trying to navigate the maze of social services and educational resources. But each step forward seemed to reveal new challenges. School enrollment required documentation they didn't have. Shelters were overcrowded and often dangerous for teenagers. The system that was supposed to help seemed designed to maintain the very barriers they were trying to overcome. One particularly cold evening, Michael discovered Chris's usual spot empty. The worn textbook lay abandoned on the ground, its pages damp from the falling snow. Panic seized his heart as he searched the nearby streets, calling Chris's name into the gathering darkness. The city suddenly seemed vast and threatening, full of shadows where a young man could disappear without a trace. Minutes turned into hours as Michael searched frantically through the city streets, his dress shoes soaked through from the snow. He called every shelter in the area, checked the library where Chris often studied, and even ventured into the darker corners of downtown where homeless youth sometimes gathered. Each dead end only heightened his fear for Chris's safety. Just when despair was starting to set in, Michael's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was from a social worker at the city hospital. Chris had been found unconscious in an alley, suffering from hypothermia. The message hit Michael like a physical blow. He'd been trying to help, taking small steps, being careful not to push too hard or too fast. But had his caution cost precious time that Chris couldn't afford to lose? Racing to the hospital, Michael found himself confronting uncomfortable truths about society's failure to protect its most vulnerable members. The emergency room was crowded with stories similar to Chris's, people who had fallen through the cracks, whose problems were too complex for quick fixes or simple solutions. The social worker, a compassionate woman named Grace, explained that Chris had been trying to find shelter in an abandoned building when he collapsed. As Michael sat by Chris's hospital bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, Sarah arrived unexpectedly. She took one look at the sleeping teenager, so young and vulnerable despite his hard experiences, and something shifted in her perspective. The theoretical risks and concerns she'd been worrying about seemed to melt away in the face of this very real, very human need. The next few days brought a whirlwind of activity. Grace, the social worker, became an unexpected ally, helping them navigate the complex legal and bureaucratic challenges of helping a homeless minor. But just as things seemed to be looking up, they hit another roadblock. A distant relative of Chris's had learned about his situation and was asserting their custody rights, despite having shown no interest in his welfare before. The situation became a tangle of legal and ethical questions. The relative, motivated more by potential access to Chris's modest inheritance from his mother than genuine concern, threatened legal action. Michael and Sarah found themselves facing a difficult decision: walk away and let the system handle it, or fight for what they believed was right. Chris, still recovering in the hospital, retreated into himself as adults once again debated his fate without his input. The spark of determination that had first caught Michael's attention seemed to dim with each passing day. The doctor said he was physically improving, but the weight of uncertainty was taking its toll on his spirit. One evening, as Michael sat alone with Chris in the hospital room, the teenager finally opened up about his deepest fear. It wasn't the cold or hunger or even homelessness that terrified him most. It was the thought of losing his dream of becoming an engineer. He'd promised his mother before she died that he would make something of himself, that her struggles to give him an education wouldn't be in vain. The raw honesty of that moment crystallized something in Michael's mind. This wasn't just about providing shelter or food anymore. It was about standing up for someone's future, about showing Chris that his dreams mattered, that he mattered. But as Michael prepared to take on the biggest fight of his life, he couldn't shake the nagging doubt. What if he wasn't strong enough to win this battle? What if the system, with all its prejudices and complications, was too entrenched to overcome? The answer would come sooner than anyone expected, as a late-night phone call from Grace was about to change everything. Grace's late-night call brought unexpected news that would completely reshape their battle. The distant relative claiming custody rights had a history of exploiting vulnerable youth for government benefits, a pattern that had gone unnoticed until now. 3 other teenagers had previously been placed in their care, only to end up back on the streets within months. This information could be their key to protecting Chris, but using it meant diving into a deeper, more dangerous conflict. As Michael and Sarah worked with Grace to document these findings, Chris's health took another concerning turn. The doctors discovered that his prolonged exposure to the cold had affected his heart, requiring specialized treatment. The medical bills were mounting, and the hospital was pressuring for answers about insurance and guardian responsibility. Every hour that passed without clear legal custody meant delays in crucial medical decisions. The situation caught the attention of a local news reporter who had been investigating similar cases of exploitation in the foster care system. Suddenly, their private struggle became part of a larger story about systemic failures and the desperate need for reform. While the media attention could help their cause, it also meant Chris's personal struggles were becoming public knowledge, adding another layer of stress to his recovery. Then came the moment that tested everyone's resolve. The relative, feeling cornered by the emerging evidence against them, made an unexpected offer through their lawyer. They would drop their custody claim in exchange for a significant portion of the inheritance money that Chris's mother had left for his education. It was a devil's bargain. They could secure Chris's immediate future, but at the cost of his college dreams. The weight of this decision fell heavily on Michael's shoulders. He knew that fighting through the legal system could take months or even years, time that Chris couldn't afford to lose. The teenager's health was fragile, and his education was already hanging by a thread. Each day spent in legal limbo was another day Chris couldn't properly focus on his studies or his recovery. Sarah, who had initially been hesitant about getting involved, now became their strongest advocate. She spent countless hours researching similar cases, building a network of supporters, and working with Grace to find alternative solutions. Her transformation from skeptic to fierce protector showed how deeply Chris's situation had touched their family's heart. One afternoon, while reviewing case files with Grace, they discovered something that changed everything. Hidden in the paperwork from Chris's mother's final days was a letter, one that she had written but never had the chance to send. Its contents would shake the very foundation of their legal battle and force everyone involved to confront uncomfortable truths about family, responsibility, and the true meaning of inheritance. But before they could act on this new information, Chris disappeared from the hospital. His bed was found empty during the morning rounds, with only a hastily written note left behind. The words on that paper would haunt Michael for hours to come. "I won't let anyone else sacrifice their lives for me. Some dreams aren't meant to come true." The search began again, but this time with greater urgency. Not only was Chris's health at risk, but he was also carrying the weight of a truth he didn't fully understand. As Michael raced through the city streets once more, he realized that finding Chris wasn't enough. He needed to convince him that some dreams are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The city's evening shadows grew longer as time slipped away, and somewhere in those darkening streets, a young man's future hung in the balance. What Michael didn't know was that Chris had gone to confront his past one last time, setting in motion events that would change all their lives forever. After hours of searching, Michael finally found Chris in the last place he expected, sitting on the steps of his old high school, clutching his mother's letter. The teenager's face was tear-stained, but there was a newfound strength in his eyes. He had read the letter, something Michael and the others hadn't yet done out of respect for privacy. Inside those pages, Chris's mother had revealed something that changed everything. The inheritance money they'd been fighting over wasn't just from her savings. It was life insurance from a policy his father had taken out before disappearing from their lives. More importantly, she had documented every attempt she'd made to contact him over the years, including his last known address. The father who had never been in the picture wasn't just a missing person. He was a successful engineer working just 2 states away. Chris had gone to the school to access his old records, searching for any additional information about his father. What he found instead was an unexpected ally. His former engineering teacher, Mr. Chen, had been working late and recognized him. After hearing Chris's story, Mr. Chen revealed that he had maintained contact with several engineering programs and offered to help advocate for Chris's admission, regardless of his current circumstances. Just as Michael and Chris were processing these revelations, Sarah arrived with Grace and even better news. The evidence they'd gathered about the relatives' exploitation of other teenagers had caught the attention of state authorities. The custody claim had been officially dismissed, and investigations were being launched into the relatives' previous cases. But the biggest surprise came when they finally contacted Chris's father. The man had been searching for his son for years, having lost touch after a series of misunderstandings and missed connections with Chris's mother. When he learned of her passing and his son's struggles, he was devastated. He immediately offered not just financial support, but wanted to be part of Chris's life. The reunion between father and son was complex, filled with mixed emotions and years of unspoken words. Chris's father broke down when he saw how his son had continued pursuing engineering despite everything he'd been through. It was like looking at a younger version of himself, he said, with the same determination he'd had when fighting his way out of poverty to become an engineer. Michael watched this reunion with conflicting emotions. While relieved that Chris had found his biological father, he had grown to think of the teenager as part of his own family. But Chris surprised everyone by declaring that he didn't want to choose. He wanted both families in his life. His experiences had taught him that family isn't about blood or legal documents. It's about who shows up when you need them most. The story could have ended there, with all conflicts neatly resolved. But life rarely offers such simple conclusions. As Chris prepared to return to school, now with a support system and clear path to his dreams, he made an announcement that stunned everyone. He wanted to delay his college plans for 1 year, not because of doubt or fear, but because he had a different mission in mind. Working with Mr. Chen and Michael, Chris had developed a program to identify and support other homeless students with academic potential. His father's engineering firm agreed to provide internship opportunities, while Michael's connections in the financial world helped secure funding. What started as one man's decision to stop and help a stranger was transforming into a movement that would touch countless lives. Standing there in the high school hallway, surrounded by the people who had fought for his future, Chris finally understood what his mother had written in her final letter. Sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest gifts to others. The boy who had once huddled in the cold, clutching a textbook and refusing to let go of his dreams, was now helping others hold onto theirs. A year after that pivotal moment in the high school hallway, the impact of their story had rippled far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Chris's program, now officially called Bridge to Dreams, had already identified and supported 15 homeless students with academic potential. Each student had their own unique story, their own struggles, but they all shared that same spark of determination that Michael had first noticed in Chris. The old bookstore where their story began had become an unofficial headquarters for the program. The owner, moved by their story, offered the space for evening tutoring sessions. On any given night, you could find Chris there, helping younger students with their math and science homework, while sharing his own experiences with a wisdom beyond his years. Michael and Sarah had become more than just mentors. They were family in every way that mattered. Sunday dinners at their house became a tradition, not just for Chris, but for other students in the program who needed a place to feel at home. Chris's father, making up for lost time, flew in regularly to teach engineering workshops and share his own journey from hardship to success. The relative who had tried to claim custody reached out unexpectedly, this time with a genuine apology. The investigation into their past actions had led to significant changes in the local foster care system, protecting other vulnerable youth from exploitation. Sometimes, Chris reflected, even the darkest chapters of our stories can lead to positive change. Mr. Chen's involvement expanded beyond just writing recommendation letters. He helped develop a curriculum that combined academic support with life skills training, understanding that success requires more than just book knowledge. The program's participants learned everything from advanced calculus to financial literacy, creating a holistic approach to breaking the cycle of homelessness. As Chris prepared to finally begin his college journey at MIT, where he'd been accepted with a full scholarship, he found himself reflecting on the path that had led him there. The textbook he clutched so tightly during those cold days on the street now sat on his shelf, a reminder of where he'd started. But it was no longer just his story. It had become a beacon of hope for others facing similar challenges. The night before leaving for college, Chris visited his mother's grave for the first time since her passing. He brought her letter, now worn from being read so many times, and shared all that had happened since she'd written it. He told her about the family he'd found, the lives being changed through the program, and how her final words had inspired a movement larger than himself. At the airport the next morning, Chris was surprised to find not just Michael, Sarah, and his father there to see him off, but also several students from the program. One of them, a young girl with dreams of becoming an architect, handed him a card signed by everyone he'd helped. Inside was a simple message that brought tears to his eyes. "Thank you for showing us that our dreams don't have to end where our struggles begin." As his plane took off toward his future, Chris thought about how a single moment of kindness on a cold January morning had changed not just his life, but created a ripple effect that continued to touch others. His story wasn't just about overcoming homelessness or achieving academic success. It was about the power of human connection, the strength found in community, and the way hope can transform lives when we choose to see and help one another. Sometimes the greatest changes in our lives come not from grand gestures, but from simple moments of humanity, like one person stopping to help another on a cold winter morning, proving that true colors of compassion can paint a masterpiece of transformation, one brushstroke of kindness at a time.